larger multinational groups, which are frequently exposed to Forex risk. All right, Ryan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Sophia, and welcome everybody to today's webinar. I really hope you'll find it useful, and I'm looking forward to discussing foreign currency hedging and risk with Alan today. So I thought I could just start off the session by sort of setting the tone, looking at what's the next 18 months look like in terms of economic outlook. So as Sophia mentioned, I'm a director at Baker Tilly Hong Kong, but I'm also a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales. And they've recently released their economic report in partnership with Oxford Economics. So as a summary of that report, basically they have said over the next sort of 12 months, just one second, just loading the page. Over the next 12 months or in 2020, it will lead to the biggest global recession in post-war history. Oxford Economics expect global GDP to shrink by 4.7% in 2020 this year. A recovery in the second half of 2020 won't make up for lost activity in the first half of this year, and they expect that the GDP will not return to pre-crisis levels until mid-2021. This shock has already caused mild permanent damage to the global economy, and the cost of the virus outbreak in the medium term could be in the region of 1.6% of global GDP, though this estimate is subject to a high degree of uncertainty. Governments have unleashed unprecedented support to prevent further long-term damage, and Oxford Economics expects global debt levels to rise by 10 to 20% of GDP by 2021 in most advanced economies. So obviously this is going to be a very challenging time for SMEs and all businesses in general. So as I mentioned, a lot of this is due to uncertainties that we're seeing in the market, and one of those uncertainties is foreign currency fluctuations and risk. So that's why today's session about currency hedging, protecting your profit margin in a post-COVID world, will really help businesses see how can they hedge those risks going forward. So on that point, I would like to hand over to Alan, who will talk about this topic in a bit more detail. But just as a reminder, if you have any questions during the presentation or during our Q&A afterwards, just put them in the chat box and we'll try to come to as many as we can at the end of this session. So over to you, Alan.
Thank you very much, Ryan, and good afternoon. SMEs need to protect their profit margin from currency volatility. This will be our topic today. I'm very excited to talk about SMEs and the Forex market at this time. The COVID crisis we are living right now is accelerating the urgency for SMEs to protect their profit margin from currency volatility. In the past quarter, we experienced large Forex moves that impacted all businesses. This confirms the secular trend of heightened currency volatility that started during the Great Financial Crisis. What I mean by secular trend is that this period of high volatility started with the Great Financial Crisis and is set to last for a long time. As a result, more than ever, SMEs need to better control their currency risk to protect their profit margin and capital. Although my background is in Forex hedging and financial markets for the past 30 years, let me tell you how our firm, SystematicEdge, got involved in Forex hedging and working with SMEs. For background, our currency risk hedging solution that we grew come out of our family business, needs and frustration. The business is typically Canadian and operates out of Vancouver. My father-in-law's company designed some equipment that is manufactured in British Columbia and mostly sold to the US, to the likes of Ken4 and Interfor. As it is an SME, we found it too expensive to work with banks or Forex providers. They were too expensive in terms of currency conversion and hedging cost. But we needed a solution that would not erode our already slim profit margin. And we did not want to take the currency risk, which could leave us with a liability to the manufacturer greater than what we would receive from the client. And of course, one of our greatest concerns was that currency risk could lead us to bankruptcy. When speaking to other SMEs, we realized we are not alone, which led us to offer this solution alongside our other financial solutions at SystematicEdge. As I mentioned before, since the Great Financial Crisis, large currency shocks happen more and more often. This is a secular trend across all financial markets. This volatility has been persistent over the past 20 years, as you can see on these graphs. you can see what this kind of currency movements can do to the profit margin of any company doing cross-border business and why there is an imperative to hedge. Our agenda today is the following. First, who should hedge currency risk? Second, why hedge currency risk? And thirdly, we will drive you through a case study on an operating business and how they neutralize their currency risk. Here are the key takeaways from our presentation that you can action in your own business. We will review the type of risk linked to Forex. We will go through the instruments used to hedge Forex volatility. We will explain the FX hedging process to secure your profit margins while compressing costs. And we will highlight what to look for in a Forex hedging solution. First, who should hedge currency risk? Basically, all SMEs doing cross-border business in several currencies. Manufacturers, such as companies manufacturing in China, selling to European clients. Service companies, for example, consultants, invoicing fees in several currencies and paying costs in several currencies. Trading companies, such as import and export companies. SMEs, negotiating a cross-border exit or acquisition. Investment firms, for instance, having USD investors and assets in Australian dollar. However, even though all of those companies should be hedging their currency risk, studies show that only about 20% of SMEs are in fact hedging their Forex exposure. So what are the reasons not to hedge cited by SMEs? First, the perceived complexity of Forex hedging instruments. It's not so surprising. FX hedging is a very specific expertise. Secondly, cost. The first customer experience SMEs have with Forex is when they need to convert money from one currency to another, typically with the banks or an online Forex platform. It may not be a pleasant experience because in most cases, converting currency using an intermediary is costly, and many realize the full cost after the fact. Online Forex platform can make their site very pretty and intuitive to use, yet many of them are just intermediaries between you and the bank and could be as expensive as a bank. Third, the lack of a turnkey solution. SMEs need a roadmap to analyze their currency risk, establish a hedging program that can be implemented in their company and fit their business needs. These reasons are subjective, not based on risk. That is why when we work with SMEs, we do a case study for them so they can understand and analyze how the hedging process would work for their business, with what cost and benefit. Then they can make their informed decision on how they wish to proceed to hedge their currency risk. Second, why hedge currency risk? There are four main currency risk and cost. Currency volatility risk, counterparty risk, currency conversion cost, and hedging cost, or profit. First, let's talk about the risk. First, currency volatility. That is what can wipe out your profit margin and generate operating losses. SMEs need to hedge to immunize their profit margin from currency volatility, so they can forecast their cash flow more precisely and increase profitability. The objective of a business is not to gamble on the currency market, but to secure their profit margins. If you have a view on the currency and on its direction, although academic studies demonstrate it's not possible to predict or time the market, then you can express that view in your personal investments, not in your business. Ryan and I will talk about the importance of this in more detail during our discussion. But for those SMEs that do not hedge, how do they handle this currency volatility? We have seen many different techniques when speaking to clients, but one of the most common is pricing in a buffer, which means they add a buffer of 5 to 10% to their markup. This is good, but not good enough, because it does not cover large currency fluctuations, and it makes the SME less price competitive. So what we explained for those who are using this buffer technique, if they hedge, they can lock in an extra 5 to 10% on top of their profit margin, or whatever the amount of the buffer was. In other words, when they hedge, they can either put this buffer in their pocket and improve their profit margin, or become more competitive and sell more of their products and services. Second, counterparty risk. It is the elephant in the room that is too often ignored, and that can be fatal to a company using an FX provider with weak credit worthiness. A recent example of this is the €2 billion fraud of Wirecard, a German payments platform where clients were restricted from accessing their accounts. Let me show you the 3 main cases on how corporations access Forex hedging and the one that avoids counterparty risk. Case number 1. When you do your Forex transaction with a bank, this is what most large companies do, but it's not the most efficient way or the most effective. And it's difficult to access for SMEs because they would need a credit line with the bank. In this case, at least you have an account with a bank, which typically has good credit. So the counterparty risk is mitigated. Yet the bank is an intermediary, and you will not have direct access to the Forex market, which allows the bank to take a markup on the Forex rate. For instance, 0.5%, and that can be much higher from talking to clients. Case number 2, when you do your Forex transaction with an online Forex service provider. This is a more recent development due to the emergence of online Forex platforms that are intermediaries between you and the bank, and they will take a fee between the wholesale price of the bank and the end client price. Some online Forex providers use currency delivery versus payment, DVP, where the SME is asked to send to the Forex provider the full amount to be converted and therefore bear a 100% counterparty risk on the amount sent. Case 3. This is the case that avoids counterparty risk. When the SME has a direct market access, DMA, to the futures exchange market. That is the solution we provide to our clients. The SME will open an account with a broker that provides DMA to the exchange, which is regulated and bankruptcy remote. In this case, there is no intermediary service fee. The SME is left to pay the DMA fee from the broker, which is a small fraction of what they would pay to a service intermediary. Also in this case, by definition of the exchange, the SME has complete transparency on the price and will execute its Forex hedging transaction at the best available price in a completely secure and regulated environment. Now let's talk about the cost. Currency conversion recurring cost. Currency conversion needed in the conduct of business can in itself generate recurring cost if the currency market is not accessed efficiently. That happens when an SME is not using direct market access to convert Forex. It is going through a Forex intermediary involving layers of fees on top of a bid-offer spread that can add up to many % a year, eroding the company's profit margin. And finally, number 4, hedging cost or profit. A currency hedging transaction is performed over a certain amount of time. Depending on the currency pair, a hedge can generate recurring positive profit or loss due to the interest rate differential between the currencies. We will illustrate this in the following case study. So we just went through the risk and cost associated with cross-currency business. Now I wanted to quickly give you an overview of the main instruments used to manage currency risk before we move on to the case study. Forwards, futures, and options. First, forwards. A forward is a non-standard contract between the SME and a bank to exchange money denominated in one currency into another currency at a pre-agreed exchange rate on a specified date in the future. In other words, when transacting a forward contract, you agree right now on all the terms of a currency conversion but the actual currency exchange happens at a future date. What is important for SMEs to understand is that a forward is used to neutralize the currency risk of a commercial transaction. Therefore, when there is a currency fluctuation, if you gain on the forward hedge, you will lose the same amount on the commercial transaction. A forward contract involves counterparty risk as the SME is facing a bank, which will need to open a credit line with the SME. For this service, the bank will charge an intermediary fee and will hedge itself in the interbanking market, which the SMEs don't have access to. Therefore, the forward pricing is not fully transparent. Second, futures. As opposed to a forward, a futures is a standard contract between the SME and a futures exchange, such as the Hong Kong Futures Exchange, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, or Globex. For the rest, it works the same way as a forward. The differences with a forward are: number one, there is no counterparty risk as the SME is facing a futures exchange, which is regulated, collateralized, and a bankruptcy remote entity. Secondly, there is no intermediary and therefore no intermediary service fee. It's a direct access to the listed FX market on the exchange. Thirdly, consequently from 1 and 2, futures pricing is fully transparent, and by definition of the exchange regulation, all trades are executed at the best available price. That is why our hedging solutions privilege futures instead of forwards. Third, options. A currency option is a derivative instrument that gives the right, but not the obligation, to exchange money denominated in one currency into another currency at a pre-agreed exchange rate on a specified date in the future. The buyer of the option must pay a premium. In other words, an option is an insurance on a currency rate fluctuation. As there is no obligation to exercise an option, this instrument is appropriate for the following situation. A, to hedge currency risk for uncertain future cash flows. B, for those who want to keep the currency upside in their commercial transaction and yet neutralize the downside risk, of course, in exchange for paying a premium. Options can be traded with intermediaries like banks and online FX platform, or directly in the listed Forex market on the exchange, which is what we do at SystematicEdge. I will illustrate in the case study when you want to use futures and when you want to use options. So we went through the risk, the cost, the instruments to manage currency volatility. We're now ready to explore the case study. Let me describe the case situation first. ABC is a Canadian trading company with Canadian dollar as its base currency. ABC buys a shipment of goods from a Chinese supplier for 3 million RMB. The payment in RMB is 3 months later. Based on the prevailing exchange rate, ABC expects to make a profit margin of 10%. In this situation, ABC is exposed to the Canadian RMB currency risk. If Canadian RMB decreases during the next 3 months, making the cost of goods more expensive in Canadian terms, ABC's margin will shrink. And if Canadian RMB increases, making the cost of goods less expensive in Canadian dollar terms, the profit margin will increase. There are two ways for ABC to hedge its currency risk. Either sell a Canadian RMB futures contract for an amount of 3 million RMB, which would lock in the FX rate, making ABC's P&L insensitive to currency fluctuation, or buy an option to sell Canadian RMB for an amount of 3 million RMB, which would protect ABC's P&L against adverse currency fluctuations while allowing it to benefit from a favorable currency moves in exchange for the payment of a premium, similar to an insurance premium. In this case study, we compare the impact of implementing a hedge versus no hedge. We measure this impact on the company's P&L and profit margin under two scenarios. Number one, Canadian RMB decreases 10.6%. Number two, Canadian RMB increases 10.6%. Scenario one, Canadian RMB goes down 10.6%. I don't want to spend time on these accounting slides, but for your information, they illustrate the accounting details of this hedging transaction. If you're interested, contact us and we can send them to you. 2, Canadian RMB goes up 10.6%. And now let's analyze the results. This slide summarizes well the impact of Canadian RMB fluctuations on the company's P&L. As you can see, without hedge in purple, in the scenario where Canadian RMB goes down 10.6%, on the left side of the slide, ABC's profit margin is wiped out, and ABC marks an operating loss. ABC's profit varies substantially depending on the direction of the exchange rate. This creates profit volatility, which is something companies don't want. Hedging with futures, in green, we can see here that the 10% profit margin that the line in red represents is fully immunized against changes in the currency exchange rate, with a small additional profit in both cases, thanks to the positive carry of the future hedge, which is the result of the difference between interest rate in China and Canada. Moreover, currency hedging allows companies to trade in the supplier's currency, in this case RMB, potentially allowing them to benefit from better price in local currency. As with hedging with options in blue, we can clearly see on this chart that the option protects the company's profit against a decrease in Canadian RMB on the left side of the slide, while benefiting from a surge in the exchange rate on the right side of the slide. On the other hand, the profit margin when hedging with an option is 1 percentage point lower than the expected margin. In this example, due to the premium paid to buy the option. Depending on the situation, sometimes it makes more sense to hedge with futures, sometimes it makes more sense to hedge with options. But in both cases, the hedge allows the company to completely eliminate the profit uncertainty generated by foreign currency volatility. From the case study, you have seen the value of using futures and options to hedge currency risk. Now, let me break down for you the process that must be followed to implement a currency hedging solution. The first step is to carry out a detailed currency risk analysis of the company's business. In particular, we need to identify certain and uncertain cash flows in foreign currencies and their schedule. We also need to measure the sensitivity of the company's revenue with respect to currency fluctuations. Second, based on that detailed currency risk analysis, a customized forex hedging program is designed. Its objectives are to immunize the company's profit margin from currency fluctuations and to optimize the hedging carry cost or profit. The third step is the implementation of the hedging program, which includes currency conversions and the execution of hedging trades, namely futures and options. At this step, it's very important to minimize the cost at all levels of the hedging process, which means minimizing the number of transactions and also using the most liquid and transparent instruments, for instance, favoring exchange-traded futures over banks' forwards, and also executing currency conversion and hedging instrument at the best possible price, which should be mid-market or very close. The fourth and last step of the forex hedging process is risk management, which is the continuous follow-up of the hedging process to make sure that at any given point in time, the company's P&L is completely immunized from currency fluctuation. At this point, you must be asking yourself, okay, I understand the benefits of forex hedging for my business, but how do I choose the most suitable solution for me? There are many forex service providers, including banks, brokers, and online FX platforms. Not all of them provide hedging solutions, but for those who do, there are three key features. The solution must be cost-effective, safe, and include a turnkey solution that can actually be implemented in your company. So number one, cost saving. The key points to look for is whether the provider offers mid-market currency conversion and direct market access to trade hedging instruments at the best price. Secondly, safety. As discussed before, choose a hedging solution to avoid counterparty risk, where all the parties are regulated and where the workflow implementation is spread through processing, STP, in order to have real-time access to the risk reports. STP is also very important to avoid operational risk. Third, last but not least, is the service provided a turnkey solution that I can implement in my company? A turnkey solution would include the 4 steps of the Forex hedging process I described in the previous slide. Now the presentation is finished. Let me summarize the 3 key messages for SMEs doing cross-border business. To maximize their profit margins in a cross-border business, SMEs need to first hedge their FX risk. Second, compress FX cost. And thirdly, use a safe environment to implement their FX hedging solution. That means avoid counterparty risk. And now a few words about us. Our firm, SystematicEdge, is a financial services firm specialized in liquid investments and currency risk hedging solutions. We work with SMEs, family offices, high net worth individuals, and funds. If your company is doing cross-border business, feel free to contact us. We'll be happy to provide you with a free currency risk analysis and case study specific to your company's business, similar to the one I showed you. This way, you will be able to objectively understand how a hedging process can be implemented in your company, what are the benefits and costs. Then you can make an informed decision on how you want to manage your currency risk. Back to you, Ryan.
Thank you very much, Alan. That was a great presentation there. I think you really went through the comprehensive review of the different tools available to businesses, and also the key risks and costs. I think one of the ones which a lot of people tend to forget is the counterparty risk, which is definitely something that businesses need to be mindful of. So I think in terms of our clients, I thought I could just share some insights of what they are seeing at this moment in time. So you've mentioned a lot about cash flows, and I think that's very important at this moment. As we like to say, cash is king, and businesses are very mindful on what is their cash position and their profitability. So a lot of businesses, they need to do cash flow forecasts, and those are coming under more scrutiny than ever before. So banks are looking at these for potential lending opportunities. For existing lending arrangements, they're also looking at those to ensure the creditworthiness of their clients. Investors are looking at how the other businesses performing under these challenging circumstances. And key management also need to make a lot of decisions, especially on a prompt basis at this moment in time because of the uncertain environment that we find ourselves in. Also, us as auditors, we have to audit the going concern. So is what's and it is dated start for names and situation. On the other hand, hiring rules are taking longer to pay their debts. Maybe clients are asking for extended credit terms from suppliers, and also your inventories are business loss in foreign currency. Given the increased importance of hedging due to those reasons that we discussed, what advice would you have about a company whether they should fully hedge their position, partially hedge, or not hedge at all? And what would be the pros and cons of each of those strategies?
Sure. Well, obviously, for SMEs to answer these questions, first they have to understand where their risks are. So the first step is really to perform a detailed currency risk analysis.